Hi, and welcome back to our reading of The Red Lion by Maria Schepers. Last time we left our protagonist in the walled-in crypt. That was chapter 3. And today we are going to see what he does next after the terrible thing he did to the man who was his mentor, his teacher, and you might say his guru. But first, and you might be wondering why I start this by singing a lullaby in Norwegian. La stjernene for disse deg søvn. Hold av en plass til meg din drøm. Og vær da ikke redd mens du sover, for natten skader ingen, og jeg lover. Jeg vil våke ved din side og vokte deg i natt. Og senere, når dine øyne åpnes, og dagen skjenker av sitt lys til deg, vær da ikke redd mens du våker, for dagen er din venn, og jeg lover, når den er over, vil jeg våke ved din side og vokte deg igjen. Chapter 4, The Transmutation, and it starts with a quote. Why does man live within the rigid walls of time until his evil stupidity is burned out of him? It is because each of his weaknesses may become his assassin. Benevolent blindness protects man from his only real enemy, himself. Stealing the great arcanum is vain, for his own imperfect character is his trap, and he will perish with his loot. End quote. I came into Straubing during the mayor's birthday celebration. Since the day was also the 15th anniversary of his election, he had opened his garden to the public. Spitted whole calves and lambs were being roasted over open fires for public consumption, and beer was being brought from the cellar by the barrel. An intoxicated, happy crowd was an excellent hunting ground for a man of my talents. Soon I was surrounded by a dense ring of humanity, looking at palms and predicting love, marriage, children, and good harvests. While I worked, I listened to the gossip about the mayor, gossip touched more with envious curiosity than with active malice. It seemed his name was Anton Bruggendorf, and he was newly married. Although he had grown sons, he had married a poor and beautiful young widow. Meanwhile, I had accumulated a great many coins, and I was about to leave when a fat, white palm slid into mine. Quite a change from the calloused, black-lined hands I had been handling. I looked up. It was the mayor himself, for whom the people had respectfully made way. His fleshy face was wreathed in smiles. At that moment, something strange happened. As if by magic, I ceased to see and hear the forms of the underworld. I was once again a man fortunately blinded to the other existence. I was only a man, a normal man. Suddenly the warm golden sunlight, the odor of human bodies, the delicious smell of the meat, trees, flowers, sky, and children all became real again. I bowed to the mayor and, feeling generous because I had regained my normalcy, I pretended a great interest in his hand. How interesting! I pretended to be surprised. Then I told him his name and as much of his personal circumstances as I had learned from my other customers. I rounded off my reading with a few favorable predictions: more wealth, recognition from higher authorities, and a son by his young wife. But these are not the things that surprise me. Then what is it? His smile was anxious. Speak up, my good man, but wait, I don't want any bad news today, though I'll pay for a good fortune. I looked steadily into his eyes, my face impassive. Finally, my penetrating gaze made him fidget, and he stopped even pretending to smile. Then I knew what kind of man he was: superstitious, weak, and vain. He was like the clapper of a huge bell, swinging to and fro as fear and ambition jerked him. Here was my man, my raw material. Now I had someone to open the gates for me. And this is something completely different, Your Honor, I said empathically. Then I hesitated as though I could not continue on such an important subject. Oh, something dangerous and ominous. I see it in your face. He tried to hide his apprehension with a jocular wink. Well, it is of utmost consequence, I said quietly. Here, gesturing to the crowd, I would hesitate to mention the matter. We could go inside the house. He was pale and serious. I must talk with you alone, I said firmly. The presence of guests would be disrupting. I'll come back tomorrow. He grabbed my arm. There's no need. They won't disturb us. Won't you come? Now his condescending, familiar manner began to switch imperceptibly to awed politeness. So I had achieved my first goal. I had him in awe of me, and he was curious. I had no idea how I was going to continue to trick him, but I felt exhilarated and trusted my ingenuity and cunning. We went around the big house, which was made of pink-hewn rock and trimmed with a wooden balcony. Anton Bruggendorf led me to the door of the cellar in the backyard. Here, he carefully and with great importance took a rusty key off his belt and opened the reinforced door. At first, I thought he considered his wine cellar a suitable place to bathe his portly person in the mystical pleasures, but I was wrong. We were going down a dark stone corridor. Very little of the light from the summer garden filtered through the narrow windows with their iron bars. There was a blackened pine torch in an iron ring on the wall, and soot stripes running to the ceiling above it showed it had been well used. My instincts began to signal danger. I stopped, and my host looked at me questioningly. As it happens, I said out of a dry throat, I don't have the proper instruments to make a thorough computation, but your palm evokes signs of a most beautiful science, and you and I know that palm reading is just the antechamber of the truth. Astrology is the inner room for the initiates, a regal hall of the past and future under a vast tent of stars. He became more excited than ever. I understand. Don't worry about instruments. I have everything you need. Misunderstanding my hesitation, he leaned close and whispered, Don't worry, my family and guests won't know who you are. I know you have secrets you do not wish disclosed. It would make me very happy if you accepted my invitation. My whole house is at your disposal, Magister. That name, Magister, made me quake, but I was also elated with a vain joy. In that weak moment, I felt entitled to the name. The nightmare world retreated even farther. Now it seemed like a dream from which I had wakened just in time to avoid stepping over a precipice. The homage of the fat mayor went to my head like wine and silenced my doubts. I would live well for a few weeks, frighten and dazzle this simple soul, and then disappear. He would not dare make a complaint, and after all, I could not give a new direction to my life while being a beggar in a ditch. Accepting the offer of Anton Bruggendorf would cost nothing and might gain much. The stars truly do not lie, I declared majestically. Your invitation was fated. The great cosmic forces are directing us. I accept your offer. Now my host led me into a well-equipped alchemist's workshop. Bruggendorf was one of those fascinated fools who sank a fortune in searching for the yellow goblin without getting one step closer to the goal. He had neither the brains nor the perseverance, the eternal dilettante. The expensive leather folios might as well have been in Sanskrit, for he could not begin to understand their symbolic language. Mere possession of them made this dolt conceited. I could tell from his bursting self-satisfaction that he had put the whole room together as a child puts together a building set. Once he had it, he had no idea what to do with it. Bruggendorf went to great trouble to open the lead-ringed window panels so I could better appreciate the dusty stuffed animals, reptiles, and owls that hung from the ceiling. There was a melting furnace of imposing dimensions in the middle of the workshop, and he forced me to investigate it in great detail. Proudly throwing out the proper Latin phrases, he opened the latera, or sidewall of the furnace, practically pushed my head into the camera where the fire is kindled, and pushed his fat fingers into the O's, opening as delicately as any midwife. When I asked what kind of success he had had, he looked embarrassed. Well, the metal yellow's rightly enough, but the essence, there's a lot missing. He grabbed my arm, and I saw naked desire in his red, sweaty face. You don't know how I've longed for a visit like this. He winked slyly. I always knew my man would come in a crowd. A crowd is like a thick forest at night. A perfect shelter for the royal game so many are after. I became cold all over and stepped back involuntarily. For a second, I saw again the witch's Sabbath of the other world. Then the silence returned. The yellow grains in the giant sand glass on the table continued to tumble in their glass time coffin. I must get my luggage, I mumbled. I'll send for it. He embraced my shoulders, blocking the outside world with his huge bulk. Then he led me into a corner to look at a skeleton. He was as proud as though he had made it himself. Disgusting, isn't it? He said cheerfully. Then I had to admire the distilling pot, barrels, crucibles, grates, bellows, mixing spoons, containers of cinnabar, iron powder and saffron, plus the big pieces of lead he hoped to change to gold. I was becoming progressively uneasier. I have never seen such perfect equipment, I said with pretended elation, but I don't see the instruments for my own science, the astrolabium and sextant to prepare horoscopes. He didn't show the slightest disappointment. In fact, he grinned like a cunning accomplice. Horoscopes, of course! Those instruments are in the tower room. I'll give you the room right next to it, but I hope you won't neglect my humble little shop, Magister. I myself spend all my free time here, and I would be honored to have your valuable advice." I would be happy to help you," I replied eagerly, "but actually I've concentrated so much on astrology, I've had little time to practice this divine art. At best, I would be an unskilled and ignorant pupil to you, but now I understand the mystic triangle in your palm. I am anxious to learn from the stars what their forces have designed for you." At last, I had diverted his attention and his greed, but how long could I keep it up? Obviously, I had not convinced him I was ignorant of alchemy. He treated my denial as a natural defense he could dissolve in time. I had badly underrated this greedy fat man. He had guessed that I was the golden goose and decided to cage me for himself. Now, I would have to be alert and slip out of the trap at the first opportunity. Anton Brogendorf introduced me to his family and guests as the son of a dear school friend, hired as a secretary at the father's request. And my host saw to it that I was dressed very nicely indeed. His lanky adolescent son glared at the white linen shirt and plum velvet jacket I wore, until lately they had been his own. My belief that I could soon escape calmed my anxiety. After all, why shouldn't I enjoy this marvelous evening amid the colors, smells, and luxuries of riches? Even my tortures were silent, but I dared not even think of them, lest they should come back. Now I could enjoy gourmet dishes, spicy wines, fragrant and beautifully dressed women, glittering candles, everything I had missed out on until now. The heavy golden wine resolved my inner dissonance into a dazed, peaceful harmony. I began to feel confident. What had looked so threatening before now seemed childishly innocuous. I even allowed my thoughts to stray down to the grave in my soul where I had buried my memory of Rochard's corpse. Maybe he hadn't really died? Surely he had just fainted. After all, he couldn't die any more than I could. And if he wasn't dead, I wasn't... But if he wasn't dead, he could be anywhere. He could confront me on any street corner. I ran away from the thought in terror. Even being drunk couldn't make that endurable. But the wine was cool inside me. It filled me with a fierce joy. Now I felt no remorse whatsoever over what I had done. After all, I had been made alive by the aurum potable, and I had withstood the side effects. Since I had gone through hell, heaven must be in the offing. Across the table from me was a woman with copper hair and emerald eyes who wore a garment of shimmering violet cloth. This was Charlotte Brogendorf, the mayor's young wife. Her eyes sparkled brighter than the innumerable candles, and she seemed the most desirable woman in the world to my wine-fogged eyes. She looked at me frequently, silently asking, "Who are you and where have you come from? What can you mean to me?" My own eyes replied with boldness, "I am somebody with a capital S, not like these people around you. I want you, and I will take you. The only law I respect is the law of nature, a beautiful woman for a strong man." Charlotte couldn't bear my gaze for long at a time. She would turn aside, and I would see with a stab of desire that her bare shoulders shuddered sensuously above the silk gown. But presently she ignored me altogether and listened to an oily dandy who pretended to have traveled in foreign parts. He was prattling about alchemy, playing the witty and enlightened agnostic. His spicy, humorous stories of how he had discomfited various quacks had everyone rolling with laughter. The mayor laughed till his belly shook, and Charlotte was giggling excitedly. She was leaning on her elbows, and the white hills of her breasts swelled out of the low-cut gown. I found I could not tolerate seeing her stretch her body toward another man and flashing those eyes at one I knew to be an empty-headed idiot. Drunk with wine and lust, I decided to interfere. "You state, young man," I said pontifically during a pause in the general laughter, "that alchemy is just a delusion and the great arcanum a fool's dream." This remark produced dead silence. Everyone turned to look at me, but I saw only Charlotte's wet lips and snub nose. "Yeah, that's what I said," snapped the dandy. "So far, the only thing our adepts have transmuted has been words. If any gold has ever appeared in a crucible, I can guarantee you it has already disappeared from somebody's pocket." "I see, you have investigated, of course, and read all the literature on the subject. You must have experimented for years to come to such firm conclusions," I said guilelessly. The guests all laughed, and one, who knew the fellow well, positively yelped with laughter, "Heinz? Experiment where? At the Golden Cock or at the fencing hall?" Heinz, his pride at stake, stiffened. "Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if this respectable gentleman is a sufficiently learned scientist to get on his high horse. I personally have never known anyone who could disprove what I've just said, not even my Uncle Tony. And he has been experimenting for years. All he's managed to do is transmute gold to lead. I take it you yourself believe this nonsense about alchemy?" "I do," I replied. In the deep silence, I heard Charlotte give a quick gasp. "Do you believe there is such a thing as the Great Arcanum?" "I do." We faced each other in the suddenly tense atmosphere. "I take it you have experimented and got results?" My opponent sneered. I allowed a haughty and provocative stare to serve as my answer. Heinz stood, leaned across the table, and articulated his words straight in my face. "Your opinion is obvious, but if you've really gotten results, show us. Then we'll believe and repent of our mockery. We're willing to follow you, but warn you we don't forget failure either." Suddenly I saw Anton Bruggendorf's huge head behind Heinz's challenging figure, and a warning bell rang in my fogged head. Was this a conspiracy? Just then, I felt a light touch on my arm. There was Charlotte standing beside me. I could feel her warm breath and smell her lavender fragrance. "Don't pay any attention. They're just teasing you. They'll laugh at anything you do." "Oh, will they?" I looked up into those emerald lakes with golden flames in their irises. "Not while I have something to say about it," I added hoarsely. Grasping her hand, I deliberately spread her resisting fingers and laid them on my palm. "I accept your challenge, sir." I stared around contemptuously. "This very hand will shame you, my young friend, simply because your ignorant laughter irritates me. I am sure our kind host will put his workshop at our disposal." At that, Anton Bruggendorf went off to make preparations as fast as his short legs would carry him. But now, Charlotte's hand had turned cold on my palm. I looked up and found her staring at me with a strange, frightening gaze. The emerald lakes were now a cold, deep green. "Are you afraid of me?" I asked softly. She withdrew her hand abruptly. "No," she replied quietly. "It's just that all of a sudden you seem different." "Different?" "Different, yes, and more than that." She stopped suddenly as though unwilling to say what was on her mind. Meanwhile, a bewigged old woman, Charlotte's aunt, leaned closer to me. "I'm afraid I didn't quite catch your name." "My name is like the label of an unfamiliar bottle, madame. It reveals nothing of the bottle's contents." The woman's toothless mouth opened in a screech of laughter. "Ha ha! Witty! Isn't he, darling?" In any case, Charlotte threw back her head, we'll soon find out what's in his unfamiliar bottle down in the workshop. Her provocative laugh snapped the last thread of my self-control. Come with me, I choked. I've got to show you how to help me with this experiment. She followed me into the backyard, then led me into a screening bower. I pulled her to me, and she pressed herself against me. Her kiss was like the bite of a hungry animal. It surged the lust pounding in me. Abruptly, she jerked away and sat down a little way off. I stared at her wicked eyes and closed lips, my senses greatly disturbed. Charlotte, don't go away now, I panted. Oh, Charlotte. I grabbed her again. She allowed the embrace, then whipped me into ecstasy with an experienced variety of kisses, then slid away again as strong and cunning as a snake. Time and again she brought me to the threshold of fulfillment, and then emerged cool and reserved from my passionate caresses. I began to tremble in helpless rage. Witch! I pushed her away from me. The tip of her tongue glistened. Yes, I am a witch, she murmured. I prefer the unfulfilled desire. That is all that attracts me. You're a monster. I pressed my throbbing head between my hands, dizzy and nauseated. So are you. Her hot breath tickled my neck as she spoke. That's why I'm attracted to you. That's why I wanted to share sweet pain with you. Anton Bruggendorf could be heard calling our names from the direction of the house. Let's go. Charlotte straightened abruptly. I won't. I bounded out of the tower, straight into the mayor. The oil lamp hanging from the workshop ceiling made curious lights and shadows on the faces of the crowd that stood around. They, being ordinary folk, were suppressed by the strange atmosphere. They all spoke in whispers and glanced about anxiously. Ignorant people are only certain of their prejudices when they are in familiar surroundings. Here, in the alchemist workshop, they shivered at being in such close proximity to stuffed animals and the time-ambered skeleton. Anton Bruggendorf bustled around the fire like an obese volcano, his panting breath even louder than the huge bellows he used to stir up the embers. It became almost unbearably hot in the low, closed room where nervous red shadows danced on the walls. The workshop was very full indeed. The others only sensed it, but I saw. They were back again. The avid astral entities were leaning over the furnace, their cold, sinuous extremities clung to the ceiling beams like spiders' legs. They also were watching. Long, swamp-green faces watched me with a tense, gloating malevolence. I stood in the inky shadow of the furnace to make my wax pellet. Charlotte was right beside me, watching over my shoulder as I fumbled underneath my shirt. A million demon faces stared behind hers. Now I hated her. The lid of the crucible rattled as Anton Bruggendorf lifted it. The fire had melted the gray chunks of lead into one silvery mass. It's ready now, Magister, he called. All right. I moved forward, hoping to get away from Charlotte. Her body had become one of the demon bodies as soon as the elementals had reappeared. I saw them swarming around her, controlling her like a live puppet pulled by the strings of her emotions. Fear kills lust, and now all I felt was fear. Charlotte hurried after me into the red circle of light and held out her hand. Now it seemed loathsome to me, and I drew back as I handed her the pellet. She walked over to the crucible and threw it in. Then Bruggendorf replaced the lid and added more fuel to the furnace. The coals crackled in its greedy maw. Charlotte's aunt was beginning to feel faint with the heat. I've got to get out, she gurgled. I've got to. It's my heart. Nobody can leave now. The others did not even glance toward her as they spoke. The possibility of making gold had completely removed their thin veneer of politeness. They didn't care about this miserable, flushed old woman whose wig had fallen off in the jostle. I got some water from the cooling tub and sprinkled it on her face, then used the bellows to blow some cool air onto her. Maybe I prolonged her wretched, empty life, but why? Was it kindness? Brotherly love? No, impossible. I wasn't a good person, but I wasn't a bad person either, even though I had committed an insane and beastly murder. Except for that one incident, my feelings were not too different from those of the ordinary human being. I had pity, compassion, desire, ecstasy, even though I had robbed and murdered a defenseless, innocent old man. In the meantime, Burgner turned the hourglass. The time was up now. The crucible, which hung on an iron rod, was submerged in the tub, and the water hissed and sputtered. Heinz's hand trembled as he held the oil lamp over the crucible. A dense crowd gathered around the tub, pushing, tearing, and shoving each other without noticing it. Charlotte's aunt was gasping in a corner, her balding head hung down. But even she, bad as she felt, tried to push her wig out of the way under her skirt. At that instant, I saw that these people with their gold lust differed from my swarming demons only in that they had denser bodies. I was disgusted. Suddenly, there was a small opening in the human circle and I could see the open crucible. Something in it glittered yellow in the lamplight. The impossible had happened. Charlotte broke into meaningless laughter and the others made repulsive sounds between sobs and laughs. Look, it's yellow! Let's test it! There's so much! If it's real! Anton Burgner sweated as he worked tenaciously. Physical pain did not seem to exist in the presence of this powerful idol. Finally, he finished his test and straightened up. Even now, I can see how he looked when he made his odd announcement. It's gold, all right. Real, pure gold. And it's still hot. The cry burst from Charlotte's lips as though it would fulfill all her lust. They forgot all about me as they pried their precious gold out of the crucible. Everybody wanted to hold it or pet it or touch it. I moved quietly to the door and went out. But the dark powers didn't want me to escape. It was the fact that I could see them that tied me into knots. The corridor was pitch black because no one had remembered to light the torch in all the excitement. This provided a thick darkness that made an excellent backdrop for the demons whose appearances are enhanced by dim light. They glistened and changed colors all around me as they screamed. I could smell their stench, feel their reptilian touch, and hear their screeching voices poisoning the air. My abject terror mounted with my need for fresh air. I forgot the number of turns in the corridor. Malicious demons steered me into a wall, then, while I was still dizzy, headed me back in the wrong direction. Finally, I plunged headlong down a long flight of stairs that led to the lower cellars. It was a terrible fall, and Hans Burgner's mortal body would have been crushed, but thanks to the gross elasticity given by the elixir, I merely sprained my ankle. Unfortunately, I did not have the reptilian regenerative powers Rochard had talked about. I was a helpless captive for just a few decisive days, and that's how my own vanity and weakness tripped me. No sick man ever got better care than I did at the mayor's house. Charlotte herself changed my bandages. Her stepson read me poetry. Anton Burgner brought up all my meals himself, and the old aunt brought me the chamber pot. I always had visitors in my room, but I knew it was all a demon mockery, a carnival masquerade at my expense. I knew they were really weaving a rope around me. There was never any doubt about my fate. I could hear it coming for me. Its shadow already hung over me, and the shadow seemed to raise its fist. an enemy came across love's sweet cost, and in the face of beauty, evil was lost. Sky full of eyes, minds full of lies, black from their cold hearts down to their grave. Murdered the dawn, spreading their scorn, cursing the sun of which love was born. We must keep them away, or pretty soon we'll pay and count the cost in sorrow. Sacrifice, the future has its price, and today is only yesterday's tomorrow. Tomorrow, 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 tomorrow. Sacrifice, the future has its price, and today is only yesterday's tomorrow.